Bigger than capes.
Give me some outside.
Yeah, I was just looking forward to it, and then I watched it.
Oh, dry.
Hello, welcome to Bigger Than Capes. I'm still Zach, and you're still Angela. What's happening? How you doing?
I'm doing all right. I am still Angela. I checked, and Skype says I am, so therefore I must be.
Skype, the definitive identification in the UK right now. I don't really have. I'm not going to lie. I just haven't looked if there's any news. There could be huge comic book news, and I just haven't checked today. So I was going to.
I briefly looked on Twitter, and all that was on a lot of the comic websites is just TV related. So I figured let's just skip over that and not worry.
We can go right past all the TV stuff, I reckon. Especially if Twitter's got it covered. Imagine getting your news anywhere else.
Well, when it burns down, who knows where we'll be going?
Where will we get our news when Twitter's gone?
Mastodon? Who knows?
We'll never know.
No.
So this week we are going to be talking about Little Monsters by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen. I'm going to pronounce it Nguyen for the next amount of minutes. If I'm wrong, sorry. But before we get there, I wanted to do a little bit of a talk about Jeff Lemire, Dustin Nguyen, and kind of vampires, just to set the scene for who we are as people. We do this every few months, every time vampires come up, seemingly, but let's never back down.
No.
Also, I realised on the last few episodes, we kind of try and be vague and teasing about what the books are going to be when they're right there in the title of the podcast episode. I don't know what we're doing, so
professional.
It's a thinker, I'm going to figure out how to rationalise that in my own brain. So we've never made it a secret that we're quite big Jeff Lemire fans on Bigger Than Capes.
Yeah, if you've missed that, you've clearly not listened to an episode.
Yes, I think we've made an effort to not cover all of his first issues on every roundup and not constantly get into Jeff Lemire space. He is less prolific than he used to be, but still pretty prolific.
Yeah.
But with that in mind, I can't remember, other than this book right now, I'm not sure what the last Jeff Lemire book I read was. I know what mine was.
I know mine was Primordial.
Oh yeah, okay, that was recent. Yeah. That was
this year.
This year, at least the trade was this year. I don't know if the book started last year.
No. And also
what
else?
Even.
And there was also the Bone Orchard.
Yeah.
Which was a thing.
That was the Passageway that I think we both read, which was the graphic novel that I read a lot, and I still don't get.
No, I don't understand it. I have read it multiple times just because I'm like, am I missing something? Is there something really obvious here? I don't think I did.
I was waiting for that to come back around and me understand it, but it always felt like a watered down Gideon Falls issue. I haven't read the next Bone Orchard book, which is coming out in singles. I want to say it's got something about feathers in the name.
Is it black feathers?
You know what? I feel like it is black feathers, but I now feel like I might just be making that up because it sounds right.
It sounds cool.
It is 10,000 Black Feathers. 10,000 Black Feathers is.
Oh, there we go.
Which is. So Lemire's focusing at the moment on this kind of shared horror universe that him and Andrea Sorrentino are putting together, kind of off the back of them doing, obviously, Gideon Falls together and Primordial and a few other things. They've worked at DC together when he was on Animal Man.
I think they have, yeah. There's a history there.
Yeah, they've done quite a solid amount of books together. Maybe it wasn't Animal Man, but they've definitely worked either DC or Marvel together on a book. They did Joker. I know they did Killer Smile.
Yeah. Oh, they did, didn't they?
But I feel like there's something before that. I don't want to get into that too much today, but despite being the horror guy, I'm not entirely sure Bone Orchard is for me, and being a Jeff Lemire guy. So that's quite weird. But by and large, I think we were both big into Descender, which is basically the exact creative team here. I can't remember. So the letterer for Little Monsters is Steve Wands. I can't remember if he was the letterer for Descender and Ascender.
I'm pretty sure he was.
I feel like he was.
I feel like if ever Jeff Lemire does a book, it's a good bet that Steve Wands will be involved in the lettering at some point.
At least recently.
Recently, he has. I think it is. I should know from my lettering knowledge, but I can't confirm or deny. But I feel like it was.
Yes. If we're wrong.
We're wrong.
Sorry. The editor for this was Greg Lockard. Also in the credits, there is a special thanks to Kaylee Nguyen.
Kaylee, yeah.
And background assistant is Shirley Wu. I don't know if she was like helping in the background or if she assisted with the backgrounds in the comic. Perhaps we'll never know. I like to think it's the latter.
I would hope so.
But fairly minimal creative team. There isn't a colorist because most of this is black and white. There's a little bit of red here and there and other colors kind of in Romy's graffiti, street art, doodlings. Graffiti, it doesn't look like graffiti or street art. It does look like kind of childlike doodling.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that.
Yeah.
This isn't the first vampire book we have covered. We did an issue. No, we didn't. We did an episode on the All-Nighter.
We did.
Not that long ago. Probably 3 months ago, maybe 4 months.
Yeah. This year.
Yeah, definitely this year. And we've covered a little bit of West of Sundown on a roundup.
Yep.
Where you've definitely talked in passing about Bloodstained Teeth.
We have. I must catch up with that.
Yes, me too. I'm not sure what else. I feel like we've done a few different vampire books over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
This kind of gets into a different space, which is something I've always said I'm a fan of, is when vampire books try and do something different to other vampire books.
Yeah.
I think this does try to do something different, and we'll get into the details of that as we go. I feel like I don't have much to say intro-wise beyond we like Jeff Lemire, we like Dustin Nguyen, and we read some vampire books sometimes. So
it seemed like a good fit.
Yeah, it felt inevitable. I think the trade came out 2 or 3 weeks ago now. It's recent-ish. It is through Image and is probably available everywhere. Let's be honest, that's how these things go.
Yeah.
Probably the most available indie publisher. Probably the least indie publisher. That's another territory to unpack.
Yeah, that is another debate. But true.
Most definitely. Would you like to do an intro of the story, and then we'll build from there?
The tale. So basically, Little Monsters follows some children. Yes, children, inverted commas. Spoiler alert, they're also vampires. So you've got different they've all come from. We're set in the far future. We're set in 3000 and something or other. And all these children were turned at different points in history. So you've got Romy, who is the eldest, who doesn't speak and writes a lot in crayon. You've got Yui, who loves books, who was at Hiroshima. You've got Lucas, who has a guitar and sings songs. You've got Ronnie and Raymond, the twins, who seem to enjoy wounding each other by knocking each other off buildings. You've got Bats and Vicky, who I can't remember if we find out where they're from, but they're the least interesting. Let's just throw that out there.
Harsh.
And then you've got Billy, who's like the newest one, who's also sort of the leader, who's a bit more rebellious, who wants to push things out. So they're living in this chronic wasteland of the future, playing capture the flag and pushing each other off of buildings and just sitting and making up songs. When they come across a live person, a live adult, which is a bad thing for the poor chap involved. And basically, Romy comes across him first, but runs away. Billy finds this guy wounded, and the bloodlust hits, and Billy, sucks his blood and all that. It doesn't end well for the guy. But the chap has a daughter, Laura, who then is taken in sort of by Romy and Yui and Lucas, and they've got half. So it's narrated basically by Laura. And is her name Laura? I'm sure it's Laura.
Yeah, she's Laura. It's only said once, which...
That's why I doubt myself. So she's narrating it partway through, and there's also a camp of humans that they attack, and it does not go well for anyone particularly. So now you're in this situation where you've got these vampire kids who are aware, who have tasted fresh human blood. They have been living off rats and mice, and now they've tasted fresh human blood, and this gives Billy ideas. And yeah, it's a dystopian teenagey vampire tale to a certain degree, because they're all different ages. They're all old. I think it's difficult to tell their ages because they're vampires. But I think the hint is that they're all children. So they're all clearly, but Bats looks quite old. Bats looks like he could be a teenager.
Yeah.
And they've all been turned at different points in history by a mysterious adult, supposedly vampire.
Adults, I think.
Adults, yeah.
Different adults, I think.
Yeah, different
at least
ones.
3.
Yeah, and throughout you get to see a bit of their origin stories, and they were told to stay in this place and don't eat people. Well, that's gone to heck, hasn't it? That was a really long, convoluted way of describing this plot. But essentially, vampire children come across living people, murder ensues.
In a nutshell, there will be spoilers as well. I guess we should pepper that in early. I think everything you said is true. The only thing I think, and I could be wrong, maybe I've missed it, I thought this was only 300 years in the future.
I can't remember, so I'm going to have to now flick through to where we find the... Because I think Laura mentions the year.
Yeah, Laura says that her dad and one of the other guys in the camp have been trying to keep track of the year. And I think it's the 2320s, but I'm not sure which.
You could be right. There's definitely a 3 in there, can confirm.
Yes.
I won't be able to find it flicking through now, but...
That's often the way.
If it comes to me, I'll let you know. But yeah, and there's a hint as well as there's been a pandemic, because when we see the flashback to Billy, it's the second pandemic, which is slightly concerning.
Yeah, which is apparently going to happen in about 7 years. His time period when he gets turned is 2029. So thanks for that, Jeff.
So cheery, Jeff. Cheery.
Not going to let that, consume my expectations of 2029. I do question if it's just a case of not wanting to set Billy now, like right now, because we kind of see different events lead to different people being turned. So Yui is turned in 1945 in Hiroshima, where obviously bad things happened.
They did.
And I'm not sure about the other events. That was the one that came immediately to me.
I can tell you, I don't know about Lucas. Romy, I don't know how to pronounce it, but Romy.
Black Forest in 1763.
Yeah, who clearly lives with their It's interesting because they're not gendered, because they have short hair.
Yes.
In when this is taking place, but in the flashbacks they have long hair, so it's unclear. Yeah. But they're always referred to as they. They're never referred to by any other pronoun. That's their chosen pronouns. But Romy lives with their grandfather, who is killed by a vampire, who's then like, oh, you're all alone. Come with me, child.
Yeah.
Ronnie and Raymond, basically, it's the
Nebraska
depression.
in the 30s, yeah.
Yeah, it's the depression. They're the eldest, so they've left home because the parents can't afford to feed them. And they end up meeting a weirdo, having flung themselves off a train, as you do.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's all different, but I don't know where Bax, Vicky, and Lucas come from.
No, I assume we'll get their origins in issues 7, 8, and 9.
Yeah.
Issue 7 is out now. I was going to try and read it, but then decided not to because I didn't know if you'd have time. So here we are.
Same.
I think it's an interesting idea to suggest that every time there's some kind of global event going on, a vampire appears and a child gets turned.
Yeah.
I feel like there's some underlying nuance to that perhaps will matter later, or not. It might just be a good way to tie it to real world events. I'm not sure. It doesn't massively tie it to real world stuff. It just ties it to
history
things. Yeah. It's a weird one. I'm not sure if there's any significance to it or if it's just convenient to be like, hey, this is the reason these people were on their own. This is the reason these are on the, because basically every elder vampire gives the kids a spiel about them being all alone.
Yeah, you'll never hurt again. You'll never be alone again. You'll never die again.
So I don't know, is that foreshadowing some kind of thing of vampires trying to take care of these kids and be protective in a really odd way? I don't know. Maybe.
It's weird that, because these are all different children from different periods.
Yeah. And
these are different vampires doing the turning. So is this like something they have to tick off their vampire list? Like, oh, turn a child. Traumatic event, turn a child.
On the vampire bucket list.
Yeah, because it just is very odd and they've all ended up here and they talk about they told us to stay here. So it's like they're familiar with all of these adult vampires. It's all very unclear.
And when we see Billy confronted, all the other kids are with one vampire, so like with one adult vampire. So I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. I'm not sure. Perhaps all will come to light in further issues. Narratively, not much happens.
No.
This is 150-ish pages if we take of actual comic, if we just don't include the covers and stuff. Not a very dense first volume. I think it's good that we see the origins of Romy, Yui, Billy, Ronnie and Raymond, but of the present day, all we basically see is what you've described in the intro.
Yeah.
Kids hanging out, they find a living person. Some of them find the daughter. The ones who find the dad decide to go kill some more humans. The ones that find Laura are the kind of more apprehensive, wanting to stay back and not necessarily betray the orders they've been given.
Yeah.
There's not much rhyme or reason to who goes with each group. At first I thought the younger vampires would be more rebellious, but then that's not entirely the case because Romy is the oldest, Yui is relatively young, only 100 years older than Billy.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's not a very clear divide there in who chooses each group. But I don't know. I kind of feel like the blood-hungry, bloodlusty group go off to do some more killing. The nice guy vampires stay back and protect Laura.
Yeah.
And that kind of takes 6 issues.
Yeah.
And that really surprised me, just how long that took to tell as a narrative. It doesn't feel very dense. And whilst I appreciate there's quite a lot of backstory put in for individual characters, I don't feel like I learn a lot about the world or just a lot about anything, really. No,
I mean, we don't, even though we get the flashbacks to Billy and Yui and Romy and all that, you still don't learn about them as people, almost.
No, you just see the origins.
Yeah, and you kind of get the feeling, I mean, there is a very, very, I suppose, a very thin line that Billy is the way he is, that he's the more bloodlusty, crazy, desperate to eat one, because you can see that during the pandemic he stole food to feed himself. But, I mean, I'm drawing a very tenuous link here. There's nothing in here that's actually spelling that out. And, you know, maybe Yui, because she saw lots of death, likes to hide away in a library and she doesn't like change. But, again, it's all really tenuous. Lucas, no clue, because Lucas seems to be acting a bit like the wise mentor person to Yui. Don't know why. What's in his story? Learn nothing absolutely about him other than the fact sometimes he writes songs, but he doesn't write them down. And then it's like, they're very thinly sketched as characters, and it feels, which is weird, because Lemire's usually really good at that bit.
Yeah, I mean, we've always said in the past that his character work is like some of the best in comics ever. He does a great job of padding out character detail seemingly effortlessly. But what gets me here is, I don't know if I've read another Jeff Lemire book that introduces 8, 9 characters.
Yeah, it's too many.
So quickly, because even immediately reading this, I had to start taking notes of who was who and, you know, trying to give myself a little bit to remember, like, just by being like, Lucas, guitar. I feel like we're given a very vague look, and maybe you could pad that out later, but I'm used to Lemire kind of giving us a lot of information up front. I think of like Royal City has a lot of characters, but they all seem more realized and full. Here, everyone does seem a little bit vague, which I also feel is reflected in the art. I feel like, compared to Descender and Ascender and, I don't know, Little Gotham. Dustin Nguyen's art seems a lot rougher around the edges and more unfinished. I think part of that is that I'm so used to the kind of watercolors of Descender. Or watercolor styles at least. But I don't know, this, both in writing and in art, doesn't feel as complete as their previous projects together have.
No, I would agree. And it's, I think there's too many characters. I mean, I get why, because you want a gang of kids. You've got to have a gang of kids.
And if you're going to break them up, you do have to have the characters to divide. Yeah.
But the problem is that they're all just thrown in there, and then it would have, because it seems to start off with almost like, I don't know, the way that I first reading it, the bits that I read in singles, like the first issue was introducing, hey, these are actually vampire children, they've been left all alone. And then, there's a live person. And I thought, maybe this is, you know, what's going to happen here. Is he going to reveal their existence? Is he a vampire hunter? What's going on? And then when you have Laura actually shoot Romy with an arrow through the heart, and so we can establish that these are vampires that you have to decapitate to kill.
We know that now.
But when I first read that as a single and ending, I thought, Romy's dead, because throughout they've been saying, Romy will be fine. You know, they're the eldest of us. They just wander off. They'll be back. And I thought, what if this girl has actually killed this child vampire accidentally or otherwise? That was where I thought that was going. Turns out no, Roman's just like, yeah, here's an arrow. I've just pulled it out my chest. I'm fine.
Which is interesting because although Romy doesn't talk, they are quite easily the most likable character for me,
Hell
at
yeah.
least. And I don't even know. I don't know if it's just the kind of childish wandering around, doodling on walls, not really getting involved with the group, which gives them the space to kind of not annoy me in any way.
Yeah.
Like, Ronnie and Raymond annoy me. They immediately remind me of the twins from Rugrats.
Hell yeah.
Who annoyed me. As a kid, they annoyed me, so as an adult, they also annoy me. Also, I made a note early on that Raymond was the cautious one, and Ronnie was the kind of, baiting, hey, jump off the thing, hey, do this, kind of tough one. Then change that note to go, oh, no, my bad, Ronnie's the cautious one. Then changed it back because the two characters, I swear to God, either I just cannot tell which of these kids is which, or Jeff Lemire can't. Because I do not. The one that gets decapitated, I thought was Raymond, and then isn't. I don't know. I
think, is it? Hang on. I've read this page, I don't know how many times, just to double check, and I didn't actually make a note of which one was which. I think that's part of the problem with them, is that they're just completely interchangeable, and neither of them are characterized well enough. We can say, yes, Ronnie is this one and Ronnie is that one, because it's not straight throughout here.
It is Ronnie that dies.
Ronnie dies.
Who, I don't know. I feel like there is confusion. Maybe it's me, and maybe it's just because they look exactly the same.
Yeah.
But it definitely, the personalities feel like they go back and forth in a confusing way. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's always clear which one is which, and I just have read this twice and I'm a fool. But
no, I couldn't keep them straight in my head.
I also don't understand why they need to have the same hair and dress exactly the same, because when we see their origin, they're not dressed the same.
No, I don't know when they decided to, and it makes sense, because if you're poor, you're not going to be bothering about dressing your children in identical outfits, are you?
So I don't understand why in their past they were clothed in whatever because it was the Depression, yet now they're like, hey, let's both wear our matching overalls and hoodie combination, yeah?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I struggled to keep track of which twin was which.
Yeah.
Which also seemed to, which I don't know if that was me or the narrative or both. If you've read Little Monsters and you're listening, tweet us, comment on the post on biggerthancapes.com. Let us know which twin you thought was which and if you were confused.
Yeah, because we were.
But I feel like they are the exact opposite of Romy in Romy. I think I've called them both names now.
Yeah, I have as well.
Yeah. Who I completely understood and was like, I get this character. I also think Yui and Lucas seem more defined. Yeah. Basically, if you're in the group who doesn't want to go and eat the people,
yeah,
I get you. And if you're in the group who are like, hey, let's get us some blood, man, I feel like you weren't very well defined in this.
I mean, Bats and Vicky might as well not be there. Just saying. What do they bring to... Like, when Billy goes to attack the camp, so he goes off with Bats, Vicky, Ronnie and Raymond, and whichever one ends up dead. Ronnie ends up dead.
We think Ronnie.
And it seems like that's the sole purpose of having the twins there, is so that one of them can die and get decapitated, and the other one get captured by a human who clearly has plans. But it's like, Billy is the one driving it all. Billy's the one who's the violent bloodsucker.
Yes.
Bats and Vicky are just like, they're like those nameless henchmen.
Yeah, they're just along for the ride.
They're just along for the ride. It's just like, they're there because obviously we can't just have Billy and the twins, particularly when one of them dies. We need to pad out his group a little bit. So we're just going to throw them in. But they add nothing to it. They're just there. They're there. Like non-speaking henchmen in a James Bond movie. That's their role.
Yeah, kind of. Which doesn't feel very Lemire. I think there are so many characters within books like Descender that make perfect sense to me. They surprised me in this that we're not really given enough info on anyone.
Yeah.
I understand the divide. I like the idea of the reluctant vampires and the desperate for something new vampires, the bloodlust vampires, if you will.
Bloodlust vampires, yeah.
I also appreciate the kind of metaphor for change and growing up, and the idea that Yui doesn't want things to change, and Lucas keeps explaining, like, well, everything changes, nothing lasts forever in the cold rain. And I think that works as a kind of coming of age narrative, that some of them are desperate to grow up and become, I don't know, the final form of vampire that dines on human blood, and the others are kind of eager not to. I don't know if I guess that's reflected in their backstories, that we see Yui is, evolved in World War II in Hiroshima, and basically he's forced to leave her past behind. It's the same with Romy. Their past is taken from them by this vampire. But in contrast, we kind of see Ronnie and Raymond being quite eager to step forward and leave the family home to fend for themselves because they're men now. And Billy is out finding food for his family. So I guess the reflection here is the group that are ready to move on and the group that are forced to move on.
Yeah.
Which, illustrates different parts of kind of childhood and dealing with traumatic events in different ways, I guess. I'm concerned, as I often am on podcasts, that I am putting too much of my own thoughts into the I don't know how many of these things are really there and how much of it is just me overly reading into it in a desperate search for logic.
I see where you're coming from, because I think if you're reading it, you do need to sort of overlay something over this narrative, because it feels like there is a concept here that Lemire is trying to communicate. And I think you're right in that it's about the different, childhood and change and growing up and all that. And I think those themes are there. But I think that you're having to do a bit of a work as a reader to kind of think about that. You're having to overwork it a bit because it's not as clear as perhaps it could be narratively. Whether or not Lemire wants you to spend all your time reading into things, maybe he does. I feel like he can be that kind of a person. But at the same time, this feels, in terms of concept, it feels a little bit loose for him. It feels like, as a reader, you're having to go, all right, I see what the thing is. The children that leave, and the children, the children that have suffered real, Billy has suffered trauma. Let's make that clear. He has suffered trauma. His mother died.
But in a different sense, I guess. Yeah,
but that's a very different trauma to, Yui saw, an atomic bomb literally wipe out a city. Romy basically saw, their beloved grandfather was murdered. And then you've got Lucas, who knows what's happened. Lucas seems, I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into Lucas, but the way that Lucas is dressed and the way that Lucas is, it's just bringing up Vietnam for me. I don't know if I'm reading too much into that.
Okay, I was kind of getting a like grungy aesthetic, but that same aesthetic could overlap with like 60s, 70s hippie acoustic guitar. He does appear to be in like an army style jacket.
That's what I read into.
So I could see this being a Vietnam War vampire thing.
And then maybe again, like that's why he's so, change happens. I don't, because that seems quite
he's suffered through bad things, and that's
I'm
believable.
thinking maybe it's like the level of traumas, like Ronnie and Raymond left home and they were quite happy to do that, so they don't have this trauma that the other, I don't know, but again, I might be putting things here that aren't really there, but that's what this book does to you.
I'm not sure how much is subtext and how much is us writing that subtext.
Pretty much, yeah. I
don't know. I've seen reviews for this online that are all over the place. I've seen not to name names, but there are many comic book sites that will blindly praise every single book all the time. And then kind of the Goodreads side of things seems a lot more meh. Which, I don't know, I've known people who respond to Lemire books as not being something else. I've talked in the past about, I know people who didn't like Descender because it wasn't saga.
They're wrong.
They're wrong. Descender is the risk of being handed to the ends of the earth, the better book. In this, though, I will say immediately, this feels like it's really, really close to The Walking Dead.
Okay, yeah.
The black and white, the post-apocalypse, it's like if we were getting The Walking Dead from the zombies' point of view, which I don't recall Robert Kirkman writing that issue where everything's just the zombies' point of view on the apocalypse. But if he wrote it, I'd read it. That sounds sounds pretty solid.
You should get on there.
Just every dialogue box is just meaningless moans and just. I'll write you that zombie comic if Image hit me up. I'm ready.
You're available for that.
I'll come up with a snappy name.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I did review. Did I review just the first issue or the first two? And I was quite positive about the first two, I think, or the first one. The fact, though, what I think is very telling is that this is a Jeff Lemire book, and I stopped reviewing it after 2 issues.
Yeah, which was a surprise. I was quite happy to leave this one in the Angela Court. You'd done Primordial, and it felt like a natural progression. And I know how much you love Ascender and Descender, as we both do. So it was a surprise when you didn't continue.
Because I think I ran out of things to say. I think is part of it is that I was like, yeah, here's issue 1, and you can talk about issue 1 and background and all the rest of it, and then issue 2, and here's some more background, and but because the plot is so basic and not a lot, I was like, I can't say anything new here. Let's move on.
I completely agree. I think the pacing is pretty glacial, and I do think it allows for the art to kind of be quite solid. There's no denying that there are some really good panels and like breakdowns of movement, and as we often say that we like, there is a lot of kind of detail panels and little bits of facial expression, like when Laura and Romy first meet and Romy just like pops the single fang. That's really well done.
Yeah.
But I think there are some pages where it feels like we get a minimal amount of a minimal amount of panels, which feels more kind of manga-esque, which isn't a bad influence to bring, especially with the black and white. It all fits together quite nicely. But I do question how much of that styling is getting in the way of actual storytelling and narrative. It's nice to have the details, but it's not like 4 Kids Walk Into a Bank, my go-to example of comic books, has loads of detail, and loads of little tiny panels doing bits of detail, but manages to cram in so much narrative too. I also question things in this, like, is Jeff Lemire really, or maybe Dustin Nguyen, really dropping Easter eggs to other Jeff Lemire things, which is how I felt about The Passageway, because we get a little shot of Billy in the pandemic putting the kind of painter's mask style mask over his face, which then makes him look a lot like Norton from Gideon Falls, which, sure, make that little reference if that's what you want, but it seems like if this is what you're dedicating panels to when not much is happening, I don't know. It's a weird one, and I don't know. Thematically, I feel like this is getting into some interesting spaces with the changes, coming of age-ness. But I'm also getting similar vibes. Right, really up front, we're told like there's nothing beyond the city. We can't go anywhere. We were told to stay here. Unless we do go beyond the city and there is more to see. The people who told us to stay are now gone, which also made me immediately think of What's the Furthest Place from Here?
Yeah.
Which is the same kind of teenagers in buildings in an abandoned city who have all been told not to leave and have all been told that there's nothing else. Which is weird because it's another Image book, and it feels like how many Image books can exist in the same kind of space. Also, I don't know. Yeah. I also get a weirdness from the ending of this, which at the risk of, on the one hand, it feels very Walking Dead that the final page basically has to lead immediately into the next thing. And The Walking Dead always felt like you finished an issue and you were straight into the next one. There were barely no chapter breaks in the trades, and it was just relentless 150 pages of Walking Dead, which is a very Robert Kirkman thing. However, from a Lemire sense, just a really weak ending to a volume.
Very much so. Because I was, on the one hand, I was surprised how long it was. It was like, it doesn't feel like it's 6 issues. It feels like it's like 4 issues in terms of pacing, even maybe less than that. And then I was like, oh, is that it now? That's how you're ending it. Oh, okay then. It doesn't feel quite as polished as Lemire usually is with his endings. Because I think of the first volume of Descender, I can't remember quite how it ends, but I remember being satisfied, and this just makes me think, is that it?
I could be wrong, but does the first volume of Descender end with the reveal of Tim 22?
I think it might do, yeah. Which is an interesting hook. But this is just like, oh, they're having a fight now.
Yeah, and I expected the next page to be the survivor from the camp making an appearance, or something to do with the elders, all these things that have kind of, the threads have been laid, sewn. Whatever that.
One or both of those things, yes.
Yes, I expected something of a cliffhanger, and I didn't get it, which, not even a major cliffhanger. I didn't need it to be like, here's Dracula, or...
Surprise! Nosferatu is back.
Yeah, I didn't need it to be like massive, but this just doesn't end how I expect. I didn't have any expectations for how it would end as an issue or as a trade, but this was definitely not what I expected.
No, it's not. It's disappointing as endings go, particularly when he's done, like, I mean, I'm going to compare it to Primordial because he was kind of working on them at roughly the same time.
Yeah.
Now, admittedly, that's like, did we have 5 or 6 issues? I can't remember.
I think there were 6 Primordials.
6, but it was 6 and done, so it was a complete volume on the one hand.
Yes.
But each single felt like a really good story in and of itself.
Yes.
There were no bad endings to those issues, and it feels like that is a much more thought out narrative than this. This just feels almost, I don't want to say it's like the side project, but it feels like the side project because Primordial was so good and it did so much world building with an alternative, the world if the Cold War hadn't ended, and really well-defined characters, including, for God's sake, a couple of monkeys and a dog. The fact that a non-verbal monkey had more personality in one issue of Primordial than these children have in this one trade is very telling. So yeah, that felt very Lemire, and I loved it, and it was brilliant. This just feels like he's not really focused on it in the same way.
I am inclined to agree. I feel like, okay, this is going to sound harsh.
Go for it.
But I feel like this and Bone Orchard both leave me feeling the same kind of way, which is that they're kind of being Lemire coupled with an artist he has had successful books with in the past, like, Gideon Falls, Descender. It feels like returning to those teams because they have developed a fan base from those books, and the assumption is that we will come back for more, even if the concepts are a little bit shakier and less defined. I know when we started Bigger Than Capes, and when we first met, 2 or 3 years before that, everything Lemire did seemed like gold. Like,
yeah,
Gideon Falls, Descender, Bloodshot. Not all his Marvel work, but some of it. Same with his DC. I think he did some really solid stuff and some kind of okay stuff.
Yeah. That really depressing one, Snow. What was it?
Snow Angels, right?
No, not that one. The really depressing one about the hockey guy.
Roughneck.
Roughneck, that's it. Why do I think he had snow? Because it's got snow on the cover. Yeah. That's probably why.
Roughneck, Dog Catchers, all really good comics that I have read multiple times, and I think there is a chance that there's just a bit of burnout from writing a lot of books. I know I read an interview with him where Lemire was talking about like 9 to 5 writing comics, and then like 5 till 9 drawing comics, and like that's how spending a week writing a volume of Bloodshot and then not thinking about Bloodshot for months. And I kind of question, like, is working in that style just led to a point where we're not getting the best of Jeff Lemire, and I don't know. It surprises me because I know I've said in previous episodes that Royal City is like one of my favorite series ever. And this doesn't feel like there's anywhere near the attention to detail as there is in Royal City.
No, I agree. And I agree because I think once in Dustin, how did we pronounce it before?
Nguyen,
thank you. Dustin Nguyen. Because they did Descender together and it was a really good comic and it was brilliant. And then they were like, okay, so we've done sci-fi, so then we'll do fantasy. So we'll do Ascender, which is, it's related to Descender, but it's a very different kind of a book because it deals with magic as opposed to technology.
Yes.
And then it almost I don't know whether it was their idea or Image's idea going, okay, so you've done sci-fi, you've done fantasy, can we tick off the horror box?
Yeah, how do you feel about survival horror?
Yeah, how's that going for you? And I mean, they are a really good pairing. Their work on Descender and Ascender together is fantastic, brilliant stuff. But
yeah,
this isn't at that level. It's just the difficult third album has turned out to be a bit of a problem.
Yeah, and I do find myself questioning, like, if I hadn't read Descender and Ascender, and if I hadn't read basically every Jeff Lemire book, and every Dustin Nguyen book, would I be coming at this with completely fresh eyes and seeing this as like far more intriguing a first volume than I am as the veteran Lemire fan?
I do question whether it is just the fact that we've read so much Lemire and we've read stuff by this exact creative team before, quite a lot of issues, quite a lot of volumes, that maybe...
like 100 issues between... No, maybe not, but like 70 issues maybe between Descender and Ascender.
Because it was about 45 for Descender?
I would have said 45 or 50.
Yeah, and then slightly less for Ascender. So yeah, probably about 80, 90 issues. Easily. So maybe without that knowledge, we would have been more receptive to this book because our expectations are high because we know what they're capable of doing. And this hasn't met those expectations fully. Maybe. I don't know, maybe if you were less of a Lemire fan and you hadn't read all his stuff, maybe you would be more like, this is a good book. I would still question that because I don't know. I mean, it's difficult because you're always going, this is a Jeff Lemire book. But I do wonder if it had been a lesser creative team. I mean, I'm gonna do something really weird now because I'm gonna compare it to a second issue of a book that I haven't finished the review of. So
ooh, is it Kaya issue 2?
It is Kaya issue 2. Because that issue has the world's simplest, most boring plot, which is basically, we lost all our food crossing a very fierce river. We must go hunt things now. Like, that is a terribly, terribly simple plot. And yet that one issue with that terribly, terribly simple plot gives you character insight into all the characters involved. It gives you background to the world. Yeah, it's a bit too exposition-y at times. But that's doing more with a really simple plot in one issue than this is doing in a simple plot in 6 issues. And that's sad.
Yeah, that isn't ideal. I feel like I just expected more, and I can see what you mean about some single issues pack more into a single issue than this has in a trade. I'm kind of curious if the intention here was to establish loosely the characters, so the second trade, the third trade, the whatever trade can pad them out, pad out them out as characters and pad out the universe. It just feels odd to start a book without much character work or world building or story.
Because I think both Descender and Ascender had that. The first volume of both of those was really strong on all those things.
I feel like in that first issue of Descender, I think it's the first issue. Pretty sure it's the first issue.
It's the first, yeah.
Tim 21 and Bandit. You know all you need to know about them as characters. Essentially, in that bit where Tim finds Bandit and Bandit's going, "Fra, fra," and Tim's like, "Oh man, your speech circuits are all backwards. Let me fix that." Fixes it, and you're expecting this huge, talking robot, and instead he's just going, "Off, off."
Oh, yes.
Like, yes, in that one little bit, it feels like so much about both those characters is said. And I don't feel like we have that for anyone in this. I feel like
no.
That and the scenes we see of Andy reading Trinket Tocket, is it the kids' book?
The kids' book,
and things like that mean that when Andy turns up as an adult, you already know what to expect from him, even though his path has gotten so weird. I don't know. The character work just doesn't feel as realized at any point, and that is disappointing. And yeah, I expected more character work and a little bit more world building. I'm intrigued to see if we get it in the next volume, issues, whatever.
I think Romy's the one that comes closest to it, when Romy's looking through the car and the rucksack and, going through stuff and finding pens and a stuffed octopus, and throws the octopus away and then puts it back. That, I think, is the closest we've got. And again, that's why Romy is the most likeable character. Yeah,
that feels like the most definitive. The throwing the octopus away and then going back for it, and the opening the kind of pencil case and clearly being really excited about it, kind of gives more depth than anyone else's little bit as a character. Equally, getting shot in the chest and then just handing the arrow back.
I love that. Just so polite, like, here you are.
There's no... so many vampire stories, it would be, hey, you've shot me, so I'm going to kill you. And I don't think we get that. It's this sweet little, like, hey, you've shot me. Thanks.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Maybe that's it. Maybe all the character work is put into Romy, whatever we're settling on.
If anyone knows, tweet us at Bigger Than Gape, so we know how to pronounce this goddamn name.
But yeah, a lot of the other characters don't feel as well realized. Which, on the other hand, how many Lemire books are about one kid?
True.
Maybe Jeff's just not got 9 kids worth of
story in him,
full concepts after quite a lot of books with child protagonists.
Yeah.
Also, I do have to beg the question: was Tim 21 also was Tim 21 not also a immortal child who?
True. Yeah.
was the key to everything within the universe, and I don't know.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
On the other hand, comparisons to Descender aside, I do wonder if this is the so the Pixies, okay, seminal late 80s, early 90s alt rock. It's often said, not just by me, that the first 2 Pixies albums are the best ones. But if you only had the last 2, okay, at the time, obviously now they've released more albums, they got back together and all that shit. But if you just had like Bossa Nova and Trompe Le Monde from 1990 and 91, they're still really good albums, and they would still be really good albums without what came beforehand. So that, I guess my question here is, if we didn't have Descender and we didn't have everything else from these guys,
Yeah.
would Little Monsters be definitive of their careers? You don't have to answer that, but that's something to think about.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it would be. I don't know if it's... I suspect I would have enjoyed it more if this had been the first of this creative team that I'd read. I suspect I would have enjoyed it more. But I just don't know, because at the back of my mind, it's like, but I have listened to those earlier albums.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. It's hard to... Maybe when this is finished, we'll be looking at it as a series and saying, hey, this was actually as good as Descender, Ascender, Gideon, whatever. And it's just right now. It's not as strong a start.
No. I think we can say that.
Yes. And I think, even though it's not entirely for us, I think if you've read no Descender or Ascender, you might love this. And if you're really into vampires and, you know, child teen protagonists facing insurmountable odds and coming of age stories and all those kind of things, you probably will really like this.
Yeah.
Also, if you liked The Walking Dead enough to want kind of something in a really similar vein,
yeah, you'll like this. Yeah, I think there are people who will probably appreciate it more than we have.
Yeah, and it's still a good creative team. It's, whilst it's not as strong as some of the books we've read, it is still decent writing and pretty strong art. It's just not as good as Descender. But if you don't have, you know, if you can get past that, you're gonna have a good time. Maybe we'll have a good time. Maybe we'll be back for volume 2 in 6 months.
Yeah.
Updating this and telling past us that we were wrong.
Yeah, and saying, you got it completely wrong, guys. You need to think about this.
Who knows?
I
think that's all I have.
Same, yeah. I think we've covered that.
Yeah.
Such as it is.
So we will be back soon next week with more indie comics, or maybe TV. We haven't actually set a theme for next week.
No,
so
we haven't.
We'll come back with another thing to talk about. We've been Angela and Zach, collectively Bigger Than Capes.
Yeah.
And we will be back next week. And remember that, you know, everything changes eventually, even us.
Good call.